Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
So last year, it was the first PBL World. It was also my first Buck event. And I decided that what I wanted to do was take the most sacred Buck document ever, the 8 Essentials for Project-Based Learning that I'm sure you all are familiar with now, and just deface it by proposing a new hip-hop essential. So that was the topic of my talk last year. And amazingly, the Buck team embraced it. And I mean, you can tell that by the fact that I'm back this year. And also, we've been working together on a video about this new essential. But another thing that came out of last year was that I got to go around and visit some of the folks from some of the schools that were here at PBL World last year and really think about project-based learning and the implementation of it. And I got to give a shout out to the folks in Evergreen, who I got to spend a couple days with. D. Nice, also known as Denise Williams, who the fearless leader there. Oh wait, and here's the more serious shot. But through those conversations and those visits and through getting to be here at PBL World last year and sit in on some of the PBL 101 sessions, I realized that maybe I had been too ambitious by proposing a new 9th essential, and that there was probably some more thinking I had to do. So I decided to do something a little more humble this year, and I'm going to propose 3 new essentials to project-based learning. But before I do that, I want to just tell you a little bit about where I'm coming from with proposing these hip-hop essentials for project-based learning. Ever since I was 5 years old, that's me in kindergarten. Let's see, there, in case you were having trouble finding me. I attended alternative public schools all the way from kindergarten through high school. And then when I got too old to go to them, I started working in them. I'm a certified high school English teacher and studied education, history, and policy. So I'm an education nerd is what I'm trying to tell you. I'm also a hip-hop nerd. And ever since I was the same age, 5 years old, I've been both a fan and a practitioner, a maker of hip-hop music. And last year, after my keynote here, some people challenged me on that. And they said, we don't believe that that little boy with the bowl haircut was rapping. So I went to my parents' attic, and I got some evidence for you. This is a picture of Sam on the mic at 5 years old. And you might say, well, you could have been giving a speech. You could have been singing a folk song. So I also found this tape. I don't know if you can read it. Sam and Adam, that's my brother, rapping March 1986. So hopefully that dispels, that's for all the haters out there who didn't believe me last year. Hopefully that dispels any doubts. And if I'm invited back next year, maybe I'll play that cassette tape for you all. But also, while we're talking about myself and rap music and hip-hop culture, I want to mention something else that Al didn't mention in his intro of me, which is that I am what we call in the hip-hop community a white boy. And I think that's important to mention in a conversation both about education and about hip-hop, because while hip-hop was created by people of all races, it primarily was created by Black and Latino folks and comes from those musical traditions. So there's ways in which I don't necessarily have access or expertise to all aspects of the culture, but there is a lot that I do think about and want to share. So I want to tell you a little bit about when education and hip-hop intersected for me. And it was my first day teaching in a juvenile prison in Providence, Rhode Island. And basically what happened was I instantly lost control of the class. To say lost would be inaccurate. I never had control of the class. So I came in and the guys were already in there and some of them were kind of play fighting, and another guy was going through a file cabinet that I'd been told by no means let anyone go near this file cabinet. And then there was a couple guys up front who started, kind of flipped the script and started interviewing me. So I had a whole thing I thought I was going to do, but they were running the class, and they were asking me questions. Where was I from? Did I have a girlfriend? What kind of music did I like? And when I said that I liked hip-hop music, they were intrigued and had some more questions. And when I let it out that I thought I could rap, they were very tickled and instantly wanted to, nothing was going to happen except for me rapping at that point. And at the time, I was in college, and I was doing a lot of making music, and so I started freestyling. Do people know what freestyling is? Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of. How many ride or die hip-hop heads do we have here? If you don't know what that means, you're probably not one. Okay. Wow, not a lot. Okay. How many people who listen to some rap music or have some experience with hip-hop culture? Okay. And then how many people are sitting there thinking, I'm not really clear on why someone's talking about hip-hop and education in the same breath? Don't be scared. Okay, one hand. Okay, that's cool. We're going to convince you by the end of this. So freestyling is like an improvisational form of rap. So I was making up rhymes about whatever was going on in the classroom or what a great rapper I was. That's what we usually freestyle about. But that didn't really matter. What happened was two things. One, instantly, that attention that I had so desperately wanted earlier, I had. I mean, you could hear a pin drop. The level of focus was so intense in the room. It just blew my mind. And the other thing that happened was there was a shift in the power dynamic because the young men in the group came up and we formed a circle, or what we call in hip-hop a cipher. And other people started rhyming and sharing their stories, their literature, their words. One of the young men in the class that day was named Matthew Amasori. And he was like the natural leader of the group. He had been there the longest. He was also the best freestyler, not just in that group, but one of the best freestylers I've ever met. And another young man who I'd been told was illiterate, Jacob Delgado, who after that first day, each week when I'd return, would have a notebook full of rhymes. Very creative spelling, not a lot of punctuation, but clearly highly literate young man. When they got out, Jacob started working on something called the Proposal for Change, and he was going into schools and doing writing workshops with young people, talking about what needed to change in the community. Matthew pursued the music and would come up and go on my radio show with me. In the winter of my senior year, in December, Jacob was shot and killed waiting online at a food truck. And then 2 months later, February 13th, the day before his 19th birthday, Matthew, in the broad daylight, was shot and killed just a few blocks from where Jacob had been killed by a 14-year-old who a few months later was in the same maximum security unit where I had met these two young men. So for me, I've been working really closely with these guys and loved them as students and friends. This was a really devastating moment in my life. And it led me to a driving question for myself. Because I believe that driving questions, I know that that's one of the essentials and they're an important part of project-based learning, and that's how Buck talks about them. I believe that they come at these really important moments in our life. So the question that came for me at that point was, how can I help keep young people like Matthew and Jacob alive and support their growth as leaders? Right? So that was a very personal question. At the same time, as I started bringing that question and having that drive all of my work, I rephrased it. And so the public version is, how can we engage the brilliance of all young people and ensure that they're able to thrive and contribute to society? Right? And I heard last year that driving questions should fit on a T-shirt or be tweetable. So I hear this one is under 140 characters. But think about the urgency and the need to know, to cite another Buck essential, around this question, right? This became such a driving force in my life. 3 days after I graduated from college, I became the director of a Grassroots youth arts program. It's called the Broad Street Studio. And I spent the next few years working in a garage just a few blocks from where Jacob and Matthew were murdered. And this was really, for me, my introduction to implementing project-based learning. And it was not a diploma-granting school, so I didn't have a lot of the constraints that you may have around standards or high-stakes graduation tests. At the same time, I didn't have a lot of the funding you might have either. So we were doing it really on a grassroots shoestring budget. But what we were doing is working with young people while they were incarcerated. And as they came out, we were continuing to work with the same instructors, same artistic mediums, and the young people were starting and running small arts-based businesses. So we had a mural painting business, a magazine we put out, we did shows, we put out albums, clothing design, all sorts of stuff. And young people were getting paid. These became jobs. And it was an incredible experience. Young people were learning everything from the artistic skills to the life skills to the business skills. And our family, our community really grew. That's us looking like a big, cool community standing outside our space. But what happened was, as a lot of the young people got older, they didn't want to leave. So they become 20, 21, 22, 23, and they wanted to continue working in these youth-run businesses because a lot of them didn't have high school diplomas. And there weren't opportunities out there for them without those diplomas to do the kind of great work that they have been doing with us. So the program is still going. I'm now on the board, and just this year won the most prestigious award for a national award for youth arts program. But I ended up stepping away from the program on a day-to-day basis to try to explore how could we do these same kinds of things within the context of a diploma-granting school. And I was feeling like I had to figure out this piece around education. So I have a quote up here: education is the civil rights issue of our time. And I know that we all learn best and assess our work best through multiple choice tests, right? Yeah. So I have a quick test for you all today. And that is, who said the quote above? Can you all see these options? So we're going to vote in a second, but I just have to show you something. I was on the plane, I swear, on the plane on my way out here, working on this presentation. I look up, and look who I see. Option D, Mitt Romney was sitting across from me on the plane. we had a really interesting conversation about project-based learning, which I can tell you about later. But I don't want that to influence your guess. So who thinks A, Arnie Duncan? Wow. OK, a lot of fans. Who thinks B, singer-songwriter John Legend? OK, nice. How about C, George W.? Got 1, 2, 3. OK, 3. And D, Mitt Romney. All right. Nice. You're all right. Everyone put your hand up. Everyone has said it, right? We all know that education is really important. But what does that mean? And what should the education that we're providing young people look like, right? I know that they need to go get those diplomas, but what should be happening in the schools? That was the question that I set out to answer leaving Broad Street Studio. And I've had an amazing opportunity over the last 8 years to explore this question. So first, as the director of annual reviews and partnerships for something called the Alternative High School Initiative, which was a network of networks of schools. And these schools had really different models, but they were all trying to answer this question in the same way, particularly for students who traditional school had not worked for. All these networks were asking, how can we re-engage them? So I got to visit, over the course of 5 years, being the director of annual reviews and partnerships for this network, I got to visit many of the 275 schools in the network. And then through my last few years of consulting and going around talking about the book, I've gotten to see a lot more great schools all over the country. So this has all been, helping me formulate the answer to that question. But there was one school in particular that I saw back when I was doing the work with the Alternative High School Initiative that really stood out to me. It really reminded me of the work we were doing at Broad Street Studio. And they were really doing it with the most marginalized young people. And the school was called the High School for Recording Arts in St. Paul, Minnesota. Students at HSRA came from the toughest circumstances. Over 60% at any given time are adjudicated. Over 30% at any given time are homeless without a permanent home. 20% or greater are parents or pregnant while they're in school. But unlike a lot of the schools for those populations of young people, HSRA is a really vibrant environment. There's professional quality recording studios, record label boardrooms, dance studios, graphic design labs. They have an open floor plan that resembles the ones that you hear touted at Google and Facebook and the New York Times. And a performance space that has vending machines that not only sell snacks, they sell blank CDs, which I thought was so great when I first visited, that young people are creating stuff and passionate about the work that they're doing in school, young people who have dropped out and left many other schools previously, that they are going to spend money at the snack machine to get a blank CD to burn out that latest project. So I was so inspired after first visiting this school that I made what in retrospect was a rash decision and decided to move to Minnesota in November. So this quickly became my reality. But despite the weather, which was really that bad, it was an incredible set of time. I spent about 1.5 years out there just studying the school, spending a lot of time there, and having a lot of conversations with the students, the teachers, the school leaders, and other colleagues from around the country. And we formed sort of an informal think tank and came up with this concept called hip-hop genius. And the idea behind it was that just like hip-hop had been created by young people who society had given up on, who then in a situation of very few resources, created something spectacular out of nothing, that we as educators also face a situation where we have very limited resources right now. So how can we borrow and learn from that culture and have it influence our work? So I worked for about 5 years trying to explore those questions. And I wrote an entire book about it. And if you all don't have anything else to do today, I figured I would just read the entire thing to you. Luckily, I put together a 4-minute video that explains those ideas. So I'm going to share that with you, and then I'll talk about my 3 new hip-hop essentials for project-based learning.
When I was 20 years old, I started teaching at a juvenile prison. While there were many things that separated us, I quickly discovered my students and I had one big thing in common: our love of hip-hop. For the next few years, rap music became the main content for the classes I taught, and I saw disengaged students emerge as leaders and experts. Through engaging elements of hip-hop culture together, students and I learned language arts, life skills, and to love each other and ourselves more. As I continued to observe the ways in which our education system is rigged against Black and Latino students and students from low-income communities, I asked myself what else we as educators could learn from hip-hop, the insanely innovative and influential global phenomenon that has emerged from those very same communities. When I say hip-hop, I'm not just talking about music or music, graffiti, and dance, which are considered its central elements. I'm referring to the blend of instincts, confidence, and ingenuity that develops in oppressed communities, as has been demonstrated through the evolution of hip-hop culture. I'm talking about a Jamaican teenager in the South Bronx taking two records of the same song and fading back and forth between them to create a new musical composition by playing the most danceable segment over and over. I'm talking about aspiring visual artists realizing they didn't need galleries to represent them for their work to be seen, and instead painting on train cars and instantly having an audience of hundreds of thousands. I'm talking about a high school dropout from the projects of Marcy using his entrepreneurial hustle and rap skills to go from selling drugs to selling CDs out of the trunk of his car to selling products at Macy's. This is what my colleagues and I call hip-hop genius, creative resourcefulness in the face of limited resources, or as it is often said in the hip-hop community, flipping something out of nothing. How can this audacious approach impact our education system? For starters, we need to exhibit the brash creativity of hip-hop's pioneers. Just as hip-hop producers sampled songs from other genres, creating unique new sounds to please audiences' ears, hip-hop educators can borrow from diverse models and improvise innovative blends of educational practices customized to meet students' needs. If that sounds too abstract, take a look at the High School for Recording Arts in Minnesota, where they've mixed project-based learning and competency-based assessment with artistic, vocational, and business training with dual enrollment at local colleges with a heavy dose of student leadership. We don't have to do the same thing that's been done before or follow one model. We can sample and mix multiple teaching techniques and school designs to find the blends that best serve our students. We also need to adopt the value hip-hop places on staying fresh. A hot beat yesterday was a hot beat yesterday. Whoever sets out to make a hot beat today has to do something new and different to remain relevant. The world is changing rapidly around us. The top 10 jobs in 2010 didn't exist 6 years earlier. Hip-hop's premium on freshness must permeate our schools. And we need to be resourceful. In the 1970s, thousands of families chose to replace their linoleum floors. In poor neighborhoods, the old linoleum was left in piles on the street. Young people, without access to playgrounds or dance classes, turned their parents' trash into dance floors and invented new moves like the windmill and the headspin to maximize its potential. Faced with our own resource constraints, educators need to find new platforms. What refuse could we be dancing on? And what are our new moves? Behind the mic, spray cans, turntables, and when it comes to their educations, students have brilliant ideas and instincts. Hip-hop genius is not just about teachers using hip-hop songs to get kids to succeed in traditional schools. It's about changing education to respect and build from young people's brilliance. It's about the incredible possibilities that occur when students are engaged, not as consumers, but as creators. We don't need to tweak the content inside existing traditional academic structures. We need to think outside the classroom and build institutions that are fundamentally more responsive to young people's interests and ingenuity. We need to create schools and school systems that not only teach hip-hop, they are hip-hop.
All right, so that gives you the flavor for this concept of hip-hop genius that I've been working on for the last several years. But I said that it was a good connection to zeroing in on the 9th essential for project-based learning that I proposed last year. And here it is. So still proposed, it hasn't been added to the 8 essentials officially yet. Keep it real. So keeping it real is a major value in hip-hop culture. When I would ask the young men that I was working with at the juvenile prison, or when I work with any group of young people, and I ask them, what music are you into right now? What artists are you listening to? A lot of times, once they tell me, and I say, well, why? Why do you like that particular artist? Before they'll talk about that person's lyrics, before they talk about their voice or their flow, before they talk about the beats, they say, because he's real. And it's often he, because it's a lot of the MCs that the young men in the prison liked were males. What does that mean, because he's real? Because he practices what he preaches. The stuff he talks about in his songs, their perception is he's really out there doing those things. Because he stays true to his own identity, his values, his culture, right? So when I said my video was a great example of this essential, I meant that it's a great example of keeping it real world, right? So this is Mike, who created the video. He graduated this year from a program called College Unbound, which was started by Big Picture Learning, and it's a project-based college. And Mike started really passionate about sailing. He bought a sailboat. But then he saw an animated video online, and it inspired him, and he sold the sailboat. He bought a really fancy camera, a whiteboard, and some markers and some lights, and he started trying to produce whiteboard videos. Mike he just graduated a few months ago. He now runs a studio that's innovating at the cusp of mixing web and video and working with clients like Mozilla and Make Magazine. But I just want to emphasize when I talk about real world, that I think that young people, the best places for them to learn how to survive and thrive in the real world where they're going to have to exist is in that classroom of the real world. So think about how you learn to teach, right? Most of us here have been trained as teachers. Yeah? So hopefully, at least a few of us. So we probably read books, right? We probably listened to some lectures. We probably had some really lively conversations in a college classroom somewhere. Is any of this? Yeah. But what else did we do? We probably went into a real elementary, a real middle, or a real high school and did something called student teaching, right? This was an experience where we went into the real world. It was a great way to learn how to teach. Similarly, doctors. Of course, we hope they study books and read a lot and all of that. But they do residencies, they do rounds, they do rotations, they get out there and have the real experiences. We know that this is a really good way for people to learn, but we don't do it often enough for our younger students, right? And I'm not talking about just sending people out into the world with no instruction. I'm talking about scaffolded, supported, real-world learning experiences. So I want to talk about a network of schools that I mentioned a moment ago that does a lot of really great project-based learning with real-world experiences called Big Picture Learning. And at Big Picture Schools, I want to give a shout out to Rachel in the back who's doing the illustrations this week, who was one of the early advisors at a Big Picture School. Big Picture Schools don't have teachers, they have advisors who work with young people from 9th grade through 12th grade. 2 days a week, young people are out in the community doing real-world projects based on things they're passionate about. If I come in as a 9th grader and I love to bake, I have an internship at a bakery and do projects around that. If 2 years in I realize that actually I really love animals, I can switch and do an internship at a veterinary clinic, at an animal shelter, right? So I'm doing projects related to the things I care about. I'm doing them in the real world. So I want to introduce the guys who founded Big Picture Learning, Elliot Washer and Dennis Lickey, and just share a little bit from each of them. Elliot had a book come out this year, and as a mentor of mine, I feel I need to promote it for him. It's called Leaving to Learn, with a guy named Charlie Mojowski. And in it, they have a section on authenticity, and they say, recall your school experience. Did you feel at times that you were in a restaurant being fed the menu rather than what's on the menu? The settings, people, places, and contexts of school are at best fake real, scripted like reality television. In school, most experiences are indirect, and students have no firsthand experience with real-world mysteries and problems. The curriculum's scope and sequence don't reflect the way knowledge and skills are used in the real world. Dennis, the other founder of Big Picture, also has a book, came out a few years ago, called The Big Picture. And in his book, Dennis tells a story about a school he worked at before they started the Met schools through Big Picture, where he had a teacher who did a project that was really successful. It was a unit on elections, and the students researched the candidates. They researched the candidates' positions. They went out, they talked with voters. They registered voters. They let them know about the candidates. It was a huge success. The students loved it. The teacher thought it was great. They were learning what they needed to learn. Folks in the community appreciated it. So she wanted to do something similar for the next project. They had to learn about geography. And she had them do a unit where they were planning trips, and they called real travel agents and talked to them. But the project didn't have the same energy. And when it was over, she asked Dennis, she said, why didn't this project have the same feeling as the last one? And he said, the answer's simple. The kids knew they weren't really going to get to go on the trips. And he went on to point out that many teachers work very hard to make lessons that look and feel real, but all the while, the real world is going on right outside, filled with history, social issues, scientific exploration, technology, and everything else. So Dennis asks, why don't we just step back outside? And I want to highlight two of the things that I think we gain when we do step outside, as Dennis suggests. The first one is relationships, or real-ationships. I did that for you, Al, because Al loves puns. People talk a lot about the number of books a child reads or how many words they're exposed to as being one of the things that create what's sometimes called an achievement gap, but many of us call an opportunity gap. I think that relationships with people in the world is at least as important a part of that, right? If you grow up and you have access to professionals and all sorts of different career paths, you learn about those possibilities. I'm sure that all of us who went into education knew at least one great teacher because we had the opportunity to meet them by virtue of the fact that we went to school. But in terms of other career paths, if we never know anyone, if our parents don't have a friend who's doing it, how do we learn what that's really like? And how do we get connections in that field? So the relationships that get formed are huge. Mike said something great, who I showed, who made the video to me the other day. He said, I'm getting in better and better arguments with more and more important people. And this is something that I wish for all our students. And some can get it at home, but for many, it's up to us to help them make these connections. And then the second piece about real-world learning is that products have real value, right? And I think in many ways we live in what might be called a disposable culture, where young people see from their earliest memories of disposable diapers to fast food wrappers, and when they come to school, it becomes their work. And often, as soon as work gets a grade, it's discarded, right? And I think that we want to send a really different message to young people. How much can we expect them to care about their learning if it's not being valued in the real world beyond the classroom in that way? So for instance, instead of doing what I did for 4 years in college, where I wrote essays that never saw the light of day outside of a professor's mailbox, Mike is in college, or was just in college, making these videos that are being seen all over the world. Folks have translated just that video that we just did into 6 different languages. And in fact, I know we have folks here from all over the world. I made this short link. If you go to this link, you can actually find the video in Spanish, Turkish, Japanese, and several other languages. So, Mike is getting to make things that really matter and that are really affecting the way people think. So much so that all those translations are crowdsourced. So people in different countries seeing the video and wanting to translate it and share it. So I want to close out this piece on the 9th essential for project-based learning just by showing you a quick clip of the real-world product that Mike has been working on about this essential. So that's kind of meta, right? And he's still innovating, keeping with the whiteboard aesthetic, but now incorporating video and a technique called rotoscoping. To keep it real with you, we're still very much in the PBL essential of feedback and revision on this video. And I'm not playing the audio for you because it's just me saying things that I just said, so that would be kind of weird. But I just wanted to give you a little flavor for it. So this will be out in the next few months and will help share this 9th essential of project-based learning. And then maybe we can take the word proposed off the beginning of that. But now I want to share the brand new proposed 10th essential of project-based learning, and that is keep it real. It's not a slide fail. I am aware that the 9th and 10th essentials are both actually keep it real. And essential number 10 is also related to keeping it real world, but not so much about getting outside the school building. It's more about engaging in the real work that the scientists, historians, journalists, mathematicians, and artists do when they're doing their jobs. And I want to give a shout out to John Larmer, who has this article that's been influential to me on authenticity in project-based learning on Edutopia. And he gets at this notion and lays out a spectrum of authenticity, or what I might call a spectrum of realness. And he suggests 4 specific ways that teachers can make work real within the classroom. So there's a range, right? And any project can have some level of that authenticity or realness, and I think we want to just push it down that spectrum, right? So if we have a young person who's doing a project on architecture, we want to make sure they're using the real materials that architects use. They're getting exposed to the real software that architects might use to design, and that they're having real charrettes, right? And getting critiqued and being assessed the way an architect's designs would be assessed. So just a quick story about this kind of real work. When I was working on my book, I was doing a chapter where I followed a student named Lil C throughout a day in her life at the school, the High School for Recording Arts. And she was working on 2 projects the day I followed her. One was a rap song that she was submitting to go on the soundtrack of a major motion picture. The other was a book about astrology, people's signs. And she was going around and interviewing. She was just doing this project within the school, interviewing other students and some teachers. And after she would interview someone, she would have them sign this form. And I asked her, what is that form that you keep having people sign? And she said, oh, it's a release form. I mean, if you're putting someone's interview and their name in a book, you have to have a release form. And I said, you do? I'd been working on this book for like 5 years, had not done any of that. I went out and called my publisher, and they said, oh yeah, most definitely. You got to have release forms, especially if they're under 18, and then you have to have them and their parents. And I'm like, oh my God, like I have years of these interviews. So I took Lil C's release form. I changed the name to Hip Hop Genius, and I went around that day and in the following days and got as many people as I could to sign them. But that's an example of how she was doing this real work within the context of her school, but getting real skills, talked to a lawyer, and figured out how to create this, and learning what it takes to really do a book in the real world, right? This comes back to the point I made about the importance of students producing real products that have value in the real world. Oh, whoops, there's John's article. I wanted to show it on Edutopia, and there's Lil C. So this comes to what the Buck Institute might call publicly presented product. In what my friend Kazi calls edubabble, we might call it authentic assessment. In hip-hop culture, we call it show and prove. And the basic concept is you can't fake the funk, right? No one's going to respect me as a breakdancer because I write a great essay on what it means to be a breakdancer, right? They're going to respect me as a breakdancer if I get out on the concrete, literally, and show my moves in front of an audience of my peers, right? So I think one way to check whether we're having students do real work is to ask ourselves whether students are being assessed in ways that are true to the field in which their work exists. Okay. For the final proposed PBL essential, at least for today. Ready? Keep it real. But not just keep it real, keep it relevant. Right? There, for people who are having trouble with that spelling, I took it out for you. But to me, this is the most important hip-hop essential. As Biggie said, this should have been number one to me. Too often, school is an incredibly alienating place for young people, particularly for students who don't identify with dominant social paradigms, right? As I said in my video, I think we need to create or even just allow space and validation for experiences that honor young people's culture and ingenuity. So rather than trying to force them into boxes or even sometimes projects that don't resonate with their identities, we need to tap into the stuff that they care the most about. From my experience, one of the most powerful things about project-based learning is that while a lot of what's going on in schools is forcing students to conform, PBL can actually be the thing that provides opportunities for students to build from their own experiences and their own cultural vantage points. It allows them to keep it real to themselves and to their identity. And this ties into another PBL essential, not proposed, one of the 8, around voice and choice, right? Because the more voice and choice that you can include in the projects, the more you're allowing students' identities, their passions and interests, and their cultures to come out into the projects. So I have to stop again for a moment and keep it real with you that while this may not be explicitly a Buck essential yet, it's not a new idea in project-based learning. And in fact, my mom, who's a lifelong educator, has written an entire book about project-based learning where she lays out what she calls 6 A's of project-based learning. Her first A is authenticity. And this is the third time I'm mentioning authenticity, right? In Elliot and Charlie's book, they talked about authenticity in the real world. John talked about authenticity in terms of real work. And now this is authenticity in terms of being authentic to oneself, being true to oneself. And there's a line I just wanted to share from the book where she says, psychologists say that a drive for authenticity and identity are a central preoccupation of the teenage years. A drive for authenticity and identity are a central preoccupation of the teenage years. That's what I'm getting at. And I think that's what we have to tap into. And I don't think it's just true for teenagers. I think for all students, our identity, our passions, our interests, and our culture are really central to us. So I want to share a non-hip-hop metaphor with you here. This is when urban planners are designing an outdoor space, right? Sometimes they just pave big paths and expect people to walk there. Other times they have landscapers seed grass everywhere, and then they see where people naturally carve paths through the green, and they pave it there. And they call this concept lines of desire. And this is what I think we need to do more of as educators, right? I think we need to seed possibilities of things to learn about everywhere for our students, and then sit back and watch and see what they're excited about, what they're drawn towards, and then follow and pave the paths that they create. Of course, this is harder for us as educators, right, than it is for urban planners, because every student is going to walk a different path a lot of times, and we have to figure out how to pave and support all those students. And the other reason that it's harder is because every student needs a different blend to support them, right? So it's not just one chemistry of concrete. We have to find a way to support each student and give them their particular blend of support. So I now want to show you a project from the High School for Recording Arts that I think exemplifies all 3 of my new proposed hip-hop essentials for project-based learning. This video is about 2.5 minutes, and then I'll just pull out where I saw the essentials.
Everybody needs to breathe. You can't breathe, you can't live. So, you know what I'm saying? You can't develop yourself if you can't breathe. My name is Ezekiel Miller. I go to the High School for Recording Arts in St. Paul, Minnesota.
We want to do a song about breathing and this whole topic, but one thing I had to teach them and get them to understand is you can't talk about something if you don't know about it.
If you're sick and tired of being alone in this world, chase after your dreams, and all you have to do is believe in yourself. You'll get somewhere.
United Way came to a staff member at my school named Dario and basically asked us to do a song around the child's brain development from ages 0 to 3. And we researched things that we could put into the song to make it relate to us as well as the cause that we were representing.
Through so much, see my mom go through man after man, beat up and drugged out again and again. Now I'm telling you the story so you can understand. These are problems single moms endure. So much I see my mom still on the grind, raising 4 of us.
At first I didn't like science because it was a challenging subject and I just didn't really feel like, I was interested in it. I understand that, a lot of things develop from science and all, but at first it was just so challenging.
I think project-based learning, it's a very unique structure that we have here at High School for Recording Arts because, you're never sure where credit is going to come from. We always know that students come in needing science credits, and social studies credits, English credits, all these different things. And so we want to be really creative with how we construct learning around that. In the case of Breathe, I know Isaiah and Ezekiel, they started doing a lot of research on traumatic brain stress in young people and how that can affect young people later on in life in a very negative way.
Breathing is a natural reaction to the body's will to live. Much like brain development of a child is a natural reaction to a child's will to learn. By the time a child is 3, what they will have seen and done will shape and mold the critical sections of that child's brain for the future. It is important that we come together as a community to help nurture and expand the developing minds of our young children.
Cool. So they threw that together for me, just because I said I wanted a video about an academic project. Yeah. And I should mention that the VIP program that does the video work at the school is like a special needs inclusion program that's doing all this high quality video production. So let's just look at the 3 new essentials really quick. Real world, right? This was really a product for the United Way. They had to have real relationships with real clients and produce a product that was really going to be seen and used in the real world. And I just want to point out too, they didn't have to leave the building to do that, right? They could have, the folks from United Way could have come in, they could have built those relationships there. The product can go out using the internet. They could be Skyping with clients, right? So technology has made it possible to do real world work, sometimes within the context of a school building. In terms of it being real work, right, they had to do science research that was rigorous enough to understand the concepts and then be able to represent them in a song form, which as someone who's tried to do that a lot is very hard to do. They had to do real music and real video production that met professional standards that United Way would put their logo on and put online. And I also want to point out that not only does this meet my definition of real work, or the one that John shares in his article, it also, I went through just kind of for fun, because I said I'm an education nerd, and looked at the Common Core standards for English language arts, the anchor standards. And this project met 20 out of the 31 standards. So I just had them scroll by. Yeah, there we go. Well, anyway, it met a lot of the Common Core standards. And I know that there's the sub-standards that get much more specific, but those are substandard. So lastly, the third real, relevant, right? Relevant to the young people and their identities, real to them. And I don't know if you could see the tears streaming down Isaiah's face during his verse, but they're getting to connect the content in school that he said he previously didn't like with stuff that, with experiences they had. And that doesn't always have to be. In this case, that was kind of a dramatic thing, right? And sometimes it can be that for young people. But there's a lot of students at the High School for Recording Arts for whom that's not the case. Last year, I showed a video that I don't have time to show today by a young woman named Aaliyah. And she did a project educating her peers. She had gotten to take college courses while she was in high school. And she did a project letting other young people know that you could do that for free. You could take college courses as a high school student in Minnesota for free. And it became an ad that went on TV. And went online. Another amazing project with the High School for Recording Arts is another video, and I'm going to give you a URL so you can see all these if you're interested. This is Domino talking about a project called the 26-Second Campaign. And this is a very ambitious real-world project from a school that's been doing project-based learning for over 15 years. But they partnered with a client, State Farm, and a celebrity partner, LeBron James, who's the tall one in the picture there. And they did a whole campaign where they designed logos that you see on the shirts. They did social media campaign. They created an album. They toured around the country educating people about the fact that on average, a young person drops out of high school every 26 seconds and how important it is that we need to change that. So you can check out the website for the campaign, and I'll give you the URL for Domino's video about it. Last one, I just got to share. This is from this year, a class at the High School for Recording Arts looking at issues of urban transportation, and in particular, the environmental impacts, the health impacts, and the cost, especially for young people of color in cities, and exploring the possibility of bikes as a solution, and right now underutilized solution. And they, again, created an album and went on radio shows and talked about this, trying to spread the word to other young people. They learned to take apart and put together bikes, and they did a bike trip from Montreal to Quebec City. And this is so cool, the title of the project, and I don't want to take credit for this, but some folks at the school had heard about my presentation here last year. The title for this was Keeping It Wheel, which I just thought was great. So here's the website you can check out. On the bottom right there is the school's website. Bottom left, I made a short link to all those videos I was just showing you, and I encourage you to explore because they're doing a lot of great work. So I'm coming back to our 8 essentials and the 9th one that I added last year. And then, of course, the new additions, 10 and 11. So why did I do this? Why did I push my luck after having so much success with my 9th essential, only to add the same essential 2 more times? There's a couple reasons. The first is that I felt like last year when I talked about keeping it real as an essential, I was actually talking about a bunch of different stuff, all lumped into one. And I wanted the opportunity to really pull it out and look at the different pieces in a deeper way. The second reason is I really like the idea of 3 dimensions of realness. I think a lot of times these lists and these things that we're asked to remember as educators can feel flat in a certain way. And I wanted to make this realness 3D. And the last reason comes from hip hop. Did anyone here happen to catch Jay-Z and Kanye West's recent tour for Watch the Throne? Anybody? Yell out if you did, because I'm not seeing you. Okay, where'd you see it? Tacoma. And how many times did they do in Paris as an encore? 7. Okay, so I got to see the show in Boston. You beat me. Wait, that hurts a little. Because I was really proud. My friend saw the show in New York, which is, of course, Jay-Z's hometown. And he called me afterwards and he said, it was a great show. It was weird. They did this song in Paris as an encore, but they did it 3 times. And I was like, what? What do you mean they did it 3 times? When in the history of music has anyone performed the same song 3 times at one venue at one time? And he said, yeah, they did it 3 times. And I thought maybe he meant different verses. But sure enough, I went in Boston a few weeks later, and they did the song 3 times. And the crowd went crazier each time. But then they didn't stop. The crowd was going so crazy after those 3, knowing they had done it 3 times in New York, that people wouldn't stop cheering. They came out and did it a 4th time. Then they came out and did it a 5th time. People were standing on the chairs. The woman next to me, who didn't know any of this music, she had brought her daughter to the show, by this point knew all the words and was singing along with the song. They did the song 6 times that night. So I was really proud of that. Apparently 7 times in Tacoma. And by the time they did it in Paris, and in Paris is in the title of the song, they did the song 12 times. Longer than a lot of concerts, just this encore. And just to be clear, if you don't know Jay-Z and Kanye West, they each have enough #1 hit songs that they could have done an encore of 400 songs and never repeated themselves, right? So this was a really interesting, deliberate choice and brings up the value that I think hip-hop culture places on repetition. And that is not unique to Jay-Z and Kanye West. It actually goes back to the beginning of hip-hop music and that Jamaican teenager in the South Bronx that I talked about, Kool Herc, who took 2 turntables, right, and noticed that people were dancing most to one part of a song called the breakbeat. So he played that on one turntable, and then as soon as it ended, he went right back to it and played the same part from another turntable. And while that was playing, he queued up the first one again and went back to it again. He just kept repeating that part. People loved it, and to this day, that's how most hip-hop beats are made, are produced. I mean, obviously using other technology now. And since I mentioned Kool Herc, I just have to share, because you saw Mitt Romney with my book, I got to show Kool Herc here. It's kind of a rough cell phone picture, but there he is with a copy of Hip Hop Genius. So I think that there's something to be said for developing a mantra, right, and then repeating it. Ours today is keep it real. It's something that I want you to focus on, meditate on, go back and get everyone at your school and your community as excited about it as we are, just like Jay-Z and Kanye. Be like Jay-Z and Kanye at the show. Just get people even more and more excited each time you do it. But really to form muscle memory as we kind of dance through this concept of keeping it real. So we've talked about keeping it real. We've talked about repetition. I want to share one more value from hip-hop culture, and it's something that I actually invented, and it's called swagacity. And it's a mix between swagger and audacity, right? And that's what Jay-Z and Kanye West demonstrated. This is the cover of their album, Watch the Throne, which they had a fashion designer from the company, Givenchy, do this all-gold cover for them. You know, that in and of itself, doing the cover that way, I think is another example of swagacity. But short of getting us all wardrobes from Givenchy, how can we as educators embody this? So as a bit of inspiration, I want to share one more album cover. This is David T.C. Ellis, the founder of the High School for Recording Arts. He was a recording artist. He had struggled in high school himself, had ended up graduating from an alternative program. He toured with Prince, put out this album, was in the film Graffiti Bridge, and then opened a recording studio, and young people were coming and hanging out around the studio. And he said, I think that I could start a program for them out of the studio. So he started with 10 kids. Now he had no formal education training, just started working with 10 kids doing project-based learning around music, right? That was over 15 years ago. The school has developed into the school that I've shown you. But I think that if TC had the swagacity as someone who had dropped out of high school himself to start a school, if Jay-Z is someone else who dropped out of high school and was refused by all the record labels when he tried to get a record deal, so started his own label, and now sells the music back to those labels and owns all his own intellectual property, right? If these guys can have that swagacity, I want to really encourage you to have it in your work as educators. There will be haters who don't share your vision, but the fact that you're here tells me that you've got some of that energy to bring it forward. And I hope that my message has helped to reinforce it and that you return to your schools emboldened to push your work, your students, each other, and yourselves forward. Here's TC, current day. So I want to leave you with just 3 questions. This is the last slide. It has the most words on it. The first is, ask yourself and your colleagues, how can we make our walls more permeable, right? How can we help bring people in from the outside to create those real-world experiences? How can we help get our students out into the real world in whatever ways we can? The second question is a question to ask yourself, and that is, how can I make this particular project I'm doing realer? How can I get at that real work and push it along that spectrum? And the last question is to ask your students. It's a simple question, but we often don't ask it. What do you love? You can just stop there. What do you love? Or what do you love to do? Or what do you love to make? Right? So these are all really important questions that I hope you'll take back with you. I'll tweet them out later, so don't worry about trying to capture them right now. But I think it's important that we leave with questions, right? Because so often we're focused on finding all the right answers in the work we do as educators, and I think I really want to emphasize finding the right questions. So that's it. I really appreciate you all rocking with me this morning, being a part of these new 3 Essentials. Thank you.